This week's Local Stories is going to be a really fun session, I hope. We're looking at the Playhouse Theatre and the Regent Cinema. And we're really pleased to have Stan Pretty here, who many of you will probably know, who's an absolutely fantastic local person, has a long career of directing and producing and acting, and many of you have probably been involved in the Martyrs play, the brilliant community play, which should be happening this month, March 2021, but because of COVID, we're hoping will instead happen this time next year. So instead of that, we roped Stan in to talk to us about the Playhouse, which is a subject that he's long studied, particularly the early history. So we're going to start today's session hearing from Stan, and then Alison is going to talk to us about the cinema, about the Regent Cinema, and then we're going to finish with a little quiz using the polling function on Zoom, which we've done before. So hopefully you all enjoy that. And if you listen well to our speakers today, you should get most of the questions right. Okay, Stan, I'll hand over to you. Oh, actually, sorry, just one quick thing. If anyone has questions, Stan's really happy to take questions after he's spoken, as will Alison, but you can use the chat function at the bottom of the screen if you think of a question and you want to ask it, and I'll pose it to him at the end. Okay, thanks, Stan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Emily. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here to be able to talk about the Playhouse. At least I'm only talking about half the Playhouse, really, because the Playhouse was around for, the Amersham Playhouse was really around for 20 years, from the end of 1936 to the beginning of 1957. So there were two parts to the Playhouse, really, part there to the Playhouse life, that is. And the part that I'll be talking about is the first one from December 1936 right through until March of 1949, when it was run by two remarkable women, Sally Latimer and Carol Jenner. That's C-A-R-Y-L, Carol Jenner. I think they are remarkable women. I think they deserve a recognized place in the theatrical history of this country. And I hope by the end of this talk, you will agree with me. Now, unfortunately, their tenure came to an end, which we'll discuss as we go on, in March of 49. But in September of that year, the Playhouse reopened again, and it was taken over by a husband and wife team, a local husband and wife team, who had been associated with Sally for many years. Her writing name, the name she went under, was Rosa de Leon, and her husband was John Ferris, who, as I said, both of them worked at the theatre. Now, they actually remortgaged their house to take on the Playhouse, and they went through many vicissitudes as well. And I think it finished in January of 1957. Now, both these stories are on the Amersham Museum website, and I'm absolutely indebted to Phil Hignett, who has joined us today. Are you there, Phil? Hello, there he is on the screen. I hope you will see him. Phil Hignett has come and joined us again today because he's done a wonderful piece on the museum website about the Playhouse in that second period. And that is a period that I think some of you older members may remember. If you went to the pantomime, you'll probably remember some of the people who performed during that time as well. But I want to make it very clear that I'm talking about the earlier period. So let me tell you, first of all, a little bit about Sally Latimer herself. She was actually born Grace Latimer, and when she was born, that's a question. I've had three different dates: 1904, 1910, 1911. I think Sally may have played with it a little bit, which is fair enough for an actress. But she was a very striking woman, and by all accounts, an absolutely wonderful actress, and certainly really quite remarkable, all the reports we have about her. Dirk Bogarde, whom I'm sure many of you know, was one of the players at the Playhouse in 1941. He, in his very first autobiographical book called A Postilion Struck by Lightning, towards the end of it, he talks about his time at the Playhouse. And I can actually quote what he says about Sally Latimer. He says, "She was a tough, slight, firm-jawed woman, and she ran it with total dedication." And other reports of Sally, the theatre world in 1939, talked of her as an actress of no mean ability, a leader and an organizer, as well as one of those plucky souls who won't accept defeat. And I actually spoke to an actress who did work with her, and she described her to me as a good-looking woman, a very good actress, amusing, witty. There's absolutely no doubt about the fact in my mind that Sally was a very fine actress. She, of course, did play a great many of the parts at the Playhouse, but it's also made very clear by people who write about her that she only ever played parts that were suitable for her, not like a lot of actresses who will run a theatre group and play everything. But Sally was obviously a very accomplished one. Now, she started it in December 1936 with a fellow actor called John Penrose, but he only lasted their first season, that through till the summer. And then she ran it herself then until December of 1938, when she employed and took on this person called Carol Jenner to direct the Christmas pantomime, which was called Enchanted Forest. Now, Carol Jenner is again an extraordinary character. She's remembered today really as the person who formed the Unicorn Theatre, the children's theatre, which ran for many years at the Arts Theatre in London, just off Leicester Square, and now has its own theatre on the south side of the river down by City Hall near the Tower Bridge. And I think one of the theatres there is actually named after her. But when she joined Sally in 1938, she was barely 21 years old. She had already had an amazing career in the theatre. She was somebody who passionately believed that if you worked in the theatre, you had to know everything about it. So she did know everything about it. She was really quite extraordinary. She worked backstage, she wrote, she read, she did everything. She acted, she did the lot. And again, Bogart describes her as a tall, blonde-haired girl who wore flannel trousers, a blue blazer, and smoked incessantly. She was half German. She was born Pamela Ripman, but took on the name Carol Jenner, and she's been described to me as being somebody who was terribly clever and who absolutely intimidated young actors because she was so clever. She was also a great teacher of acting, and she taught using the methods of Stanislavski and Michael Chekhov, which is no mean feat back in the 30s. And a lot of the young actors who worked for her must have found that absolutely terrifying. And she certainly was a chain smoker and gay, but she was obviously a terrific person of the theatre. However, let me get to the Playhouse itself. The building stops at the top, stands at the top of Station Road, and is the home of the Pretty and Ellis, the auctioneers. And the picture that we're referring to, Emily will put up now. This is one of the pictures from the museum collection of the front of the Playhouse. So I love that picture. It's got a pram or something in front of it, which is a bit strange. The museum does have some other excellent pictures of it. What is amazing, though, is if you go into Pretty and Ellis now, you can really see what it was like. And it takes my breath away that not only was it a theatre, but it was a theatre for so long, because it is really quite small. It's certainly an intimate theatre. I think they had about 10 rows in it. It could seat anything from about 225 to 240 people, so I've read. And when you go into the building now, where they've got all the stuff out for the auction, of course they do the auctioneering from the stage, so the stage is still there. And what really gets me is that it is a very low ceiling. How on earth they lit it, heaven only knows. Down below, there were two dressing rooms, one for the men and one for the women, and a sort of rough green room, and one staircase leading up to the back or the side of the stage. And that's where they had to wait to make their entrances onto the stage. But the lighting must have been extremely difficult. But I did read that they had, yes, this picture that we've got now is very strange. But the reason I've asked Emily to put that one up is because what you're doing is you're looking at the set of the Enchanted Forest. So they could actually get effects. They had no footlights. They had floods out the front and various spots which could be used as dimmers, and they obviously could use lighting effects. Not a particularly brilliant picture, but from that you can see that they can get a lighting effect with some backlighting and so on. So I just think that is quite extraordinary what they had to do. They had the entrance, of course, from the roadway. They had an exit door on the side, which is still there today, the exit door at the side. And they had, let's say, the entrances from down below. Now, I want to go on now and just to explain about how this research has come about, because that is really quite extraordinary. So I'll ask Emily to give us the next picture, which this is a photograph of a man called Peter Wilson. And I'm greatly indebted to Peter Wilson, I must say. Let me take you back a little bit, first of all. I first started this research some years ago because I knew the museum had some stuff on the Playhouse. And when I looked down through the stuff they had, and particularly some of the programs that they had, I became immediately entranced with Sally Latimer and Carol Jenner, and knew that I was looking at people who really knew what they were talking about. And so I did some further research, and Dick Ellis of Pretty and Ellis gave me some more programs that they had. So I was able to get even more information from that. I also went to the Theatre Museum at Bristol University, which is the best theatre museum in the country, and I found even more programs. So all told, I got a whole lot of different programs together, and I got very excited by this, and was able to sort of put a few pieces together, but I still had huge holes, particularly during the war years. And then suddenly, out of the blue, the Amersham Museum got a call from a lady who was the executor of the will of Peter Wilson's widow. Now, Peter Wilson's widow had kept this box of stuff, which he had, of the Amersham Playhouse. And this lady said, would the museum like it? Oh, yes, we said. Well, when it came, I have to tell you, I got very excited because it was like an Aladdin's cave. It was unbelievable what was there. And how Peter Wilson got hold of this, I do not know, because there's paperwork and figures of accounts and all sorts of things right from the very beginning. Now, Peter Wilson joined the company in 1943 at the age of 14. And at 14, he was a General Dogsbody, a behind the scenes character. And he learnt the trade of backstage and what have you. He was there for a few years. Then I think he did a national call up or whatever, and he was absent for a few years, but he came back and worked at the theatre for the last few years. By now, of course, he was a teenager or a young man, and he was there right at the very end. So obviously, somehow or other, he must have been so passionate about the place, he must have gathered up everything that he could find, all of the records, and sure enough, we have this fantastic collection. So I'm very, very grateful to Peter Wilson for that, which is why I've got his picture there. But the main source for me about the Playhouse was, in fact, Sally Latimer herself, and to some extent, Carol Jenner, because Sally, after a few years, started to write in the programs about to her public, and she would talk about all sorts of things. And after a while, every week, she did this, and she addressed it, my dear public. That's what really killed me, my dear public. And these pieces in the program are extraordinary. I have to tell you now that those 3 different places I've told you where I looked at programs, I've now seen just about all the programs they produced, with the exception of about 14. In these My Dear Public notices, she talks a lot about their problems, the difficulties that they had, which obviously they had before the war, during the war, and after the war. She talks about the good times, the bad times. She's very friendly with her people, with the public. Sometimes she tells them off for one reason or another. It's an absolute treasure of sort of the social history of the time, as well as theatrical history. Towards at the end of this talk, I'm going to give you a couple of my favorite examples of that. Let me also tell you some facts and figures here. During that particular time, from December 36 to 1949, they did, wait for it, 498 productions. I repeat that, 498 productions. There were over 500 actors and actresses there. There were 280 actors and 233 actresses who went through those years, and all of those productions and all of the first appearances of those actors and actresses I have listed and are available on the website for you to look at, which is quite an alarming list to look at. What is also interesting is the number of well-known names from that time. And they include, apart from Dirk Bogarde, who in the programs is known as Derek Bogarde, B-O-G-A-E-R-D-E. Dirk Bogarde, Patrick Troughton, the first Doctor Who, Robert Stevens, Michael Aldridge, Jill Bennett, Basil Coleman, Denham Elliott, Mary Wimbush, Peter Jones, Peter Sallis, Richard Marner, and many more. All of those did some of them were the first time they ever worked was here in Amersham, or certainly in the early part of their careers. Other big names, probably many more that you know, were in the period that Phil has written about, principally, of course, the Waring brothers at that particular time. So I hope you're all still with me after all this. There is so much to get through in my time here. But let me also tell you that what they did was weekly rep. Now, weekly rep was a play a week, which is why they did 498 productions. So you were playing a play at night. When they first started, they did it from 8 performances a week from Monday to Saturday, with matinees on Wednesdays and Saturdays. They then changed that to Tuesdays and Saturdays. So they had matinees on Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday. They did 8 performances, and during the week they were rehearsing the following week's play. This was common practice, of course, throughout the country, and one of the hardest ways you could do work in the theatre. Meanwhile, of course, they had to, at the end on Saturday night, they had to pull the set down, repaint it, restage it, and of course put the next play in and open that night or the next night, and then rehearse immediately for next week's play. An extraordinary learning curve. But the other thing that I want to tell you about that is in April 1941, I'm flabbergasted when I found this, I really was. In April 1941, they decided to increase the number of performances, and they did 11 a week. They did on Tuesdays and Fridays, they played at 6 o'clock and 8:30. On Wednesdays and Thursdays, they performed at 2:45 and 7 o'clock. And on Saturdays, they performed at 2:45, 6 o'clock and 8:30. That is some workload, believe me. Again, I quote Dirk Bogarde when he talks about the working there. He says, one from the basement down the rocket cut. It was what you might call an intimate theatre. We did 1 play a week, opening on the Monday night and starting rehearsals on the morning of the same day for the next. He said you could find yourself playing Laertes at night and rehearsing Maxim de Winter during the daytime. But that must have been really quite a slog. Also, the next thing I want to talk about are the choice of plays that they did. Again, the range of plays they did was quite phenomenal. Yes, look at this wonderful picture. This is where they kept their sets, would you believe? A little shed at the back. So when the performance finished on Saturday night, they would pull the set down, move the flats out there, just store them up in there, and of course, bring out the old flats or new flats or whatever, repaint them, put them up. You'd be rehearsing while all this was going on all around you. So who is that in that picture? I do not know. It could be Sally. It doesn't look like her from other things I've seen of her, but it could have been her. It could have been, I don't think it's either Carol either, but it could have been any of them. So the choice of plays they did is remarkable in that they took things like the Master Builder. Now, let me tell you about this particular one, the Master Builder. There you can see the low ceiling that I've been talking about. And the furniture and what have you, they borrowed that from local people. So that at the end of the Saturday night, they had to pack it up and send it back to Mrs. Bloggs and then go to Mr. Bloggs or somebody else and bring the next lot of furniture in. But with the Master Builder, which is a play by Ibsen. Now, Ibsen is not somebody that they did a great deal of in this country in those days. It was pretty well, not very well known. The Master Builder, they probably never heard of. So it was quite a challenge for them to do it. And it actually saved them. The place was about to go broke even in 1939. And this particular play actually kept them on the road. It was really quite amazing. And it's quite interesting to see that. I think that the woman on the left, I suspect, is Sally herself in that particular one. In the next one that I want to show you, the next picture, this is a terrific picture of a set, I think, and this is the Cherry Orchard, an Ibsen play that they did. So therefore, they did Ibsen, they did a number of Ibsens, they did other plays, Chekhov plays. They did other Ibsen plays with things like Hedda Gabler and Ghosts, for goodness sake. And they did Shaw, of course, they did Coward, they did Eugene O'Neill. I mean, it is quite remarkable what they did. And Carol Jenner, she staged 3 plays in a row in the mid-40s, which I think are a terrific combination. The first one was the Duchess of Malfi, which is a blood and thunder piece by John Webster from the 17th century. And they followed that the very next week with Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm. And they followed that with Coward's play, This Happy Breed. So they're rehearsing one play and putting it on. They give you a rough idea of it. Also, the standard they did was quite extraordinary. Let's have a look at some of the designs. These are designs that they did for Twelfth Night. When they did Twelfth Night, they noticed that it's set in the 18th century here. I'm not quite sure whether that's Orsino or somebody probably on the left, and I think Fabian on the right. But just to give you a rough idea of the sort of standard that they were producing. We know about the standard because it was written about in Theatre World and lots of other publications of the time about the standard of the work that they were doing. And Sally and Carol were forever getting terrific praise. I'd like to just read you something from 1946. Morris Edelman wrote in Picture Post, which is, again, this is in the museum collection. He says that the theatre holds about 240 and its success is a model for other towns. It's been consistently directed by 2 people with a passion for theatre, a disinterest in the commercial rewards, and a remarkable good taste and discrimination. To produce work of this kind, it needs a sensitive intelligence. To act in it requires both experience and great natural gifts. The Latimer-Jenner axis fulfills both requirements. Sally Latimer is a rare actress, an ardent, intelligent woman with powers of inflection which have almost disappeared from the London stage. There's devotion to her work. There are no stars at the Playhouse. Rehearsals are exercise in patience and persistence. Students help with the stage management. And perhaps the time will come when the players will be able to move to a theatre of their own, where they may make entrances from the wings and not from the cellar. The dress rehearsal began at 2 p.m. and ended at 4 a.m. Incredible. Let's just have a look at some of the programs now. This is a pre-war program, which was just a folded, oh no, this is a bit early, this one, I think. Never mind, just leave that one there, Emily. It's a pre-war, that's not a, no, yeah, go back one further, Emily. Can you go back? Isn't there one before? For goodness, how sad. Never mind, leave that one there for now. Before the war, the programs were like this one, which was just a folded sheet of paper. Then the next picture, Emily, what you just had us on? Yeah, that one there. They then went into something a little bit grander in that it was a folded, sort of like a mini card, it was.
Yes.
Yeah, so we went from the folded piece of paper to this sort of little piece of virtually cardboard, really, but they did have some ads in that. And then that program, which we showed you earlier, which was called Goodness How Sad. I think we've got these slightly out of order, but never mind. Yeah, the one that says Goodness How Sad. Please note the date on that, which that one says 15741. I'm not sure that that's right, because what happened was that they the play that came on at the beginning of the war actually was called Goodness How Sad, would you believe? And I think you'll find it's by Robert Morley. But you please note that on the left-hand side, there's theatre news and also talk about the club meeting. There was a theatre club that actually kept the whole place going really for a long time. And that's when Sally was starting to write notes. And eventually that theatre news developed into My Dear Public. Can you go on to the next one, please? And the next one again. Yes, this one here. This was a program that they used for many years. And this is when it became this sort of harder outside piece. And inside there, it consists of 3 double pages. So in other words, there was quite a lot to be able of space for it now. So you had some ads around the place. You had pieces by Sally herself. And of course, it was from all this information that you can see there that I got the names of when the people first appeared at the Playhouse, which has made that a list that I was talking about. And if we go on to the next ones we've got there, and yes, again, these are more of the club notes, and this is one of a letter to you all from Sally Latimer. These were sometimes a couple of pages long, and they make fascinating reading week after week after week. Where Sally found the time for all this, I do not know, because the other thing that they did was a lot of new plays. Rosa de Leon was the person who eventually took over the theatre, wrote plays for them, and she staged them. So though she and Carol were reading these new plays and putting them on. And if we can go to the next one again, please. Yes, this was the last design for the programs. And I love this one. The picture there is terrific. If you look at it, you can see that they're preparing it. On the left-hand side, you've got people at the back there painting the scenery and erecting the set. You've got people in the front there who are rehearsing, people who are putting the set up, etc. And I just love right down the very bottom, there's a very lazy actor sitting in the front row with his feet on the stage. How many times have I seen that? That particular design, they did help for some particular time. Incidentally, that George and Margaret program, when that came up, that was fairly early on, and a note went in the program on that one that lasted right up until right through the war, and it went, the men in this company are either waiting call up or are exempt from military service. And another note that they used to have in the program sometimes was, in case of emergencies, the theatre has roomy and solid cellars with exits at both ends and walls lined with asbestos. But the performance would continue, that they said. Well, I'm going rattling on here, and I will wrap up very quickly, I promise you. At the end, I'm afraid after the war, the theatre had plenty of problems with post-war problems of petrol rationing, people leaving the district. They'd been living in the district, but they went back to live in London again. There was a rationing, of course. There was television came in. Lots of things came to help to make life very, very difficult for them. They did do a swap with Guildford Rep for a while, so they play 1 week here and 1 week in Guildford, and vice versa. They started a mobile unit where they took an old wartime truck out on the road, and they took it to schools and performed on this truck. And that was the basis of Carol Jenner's formation of the Unicorn Theatre. After the theatre closed, Carol went on and continued to that work, and it developed into the Unicorn Theatre, which I mentioned earlier. Now, if we can now go to the very last picture, though, to show you, which is quite extraordinary. If we can just have a look at that, please, Emily. That says, we remember Sally Latimer Cochrane, 1904 to 1977, founder of the Amersham Playhouse, who gave much to guiding or geating power, however you like to pronounce it, the delight of her husband and of all sorts, enchantingly beloved. Well, what happened to Sally after the place closed down is that she continued as an actress. She incidentally, throughout the entire career here in Amersham, she was here with her husband, who was Wilfred Bodsworth. He actually was quite an important person in the history of Bletchley Park, would you believe, and certainly worked for the Foreign Office. They went, what happened to them after the war, it's not really clear. She did continue as an actress. She performed in Liverpool. She performed at the Seaford Playhouse under Carol Jenner on a couple of occasions. But she must have retired from the theatre with her husband, and they went to live in this place called Guiting Power up in Gloucestershire, not far from Stow-on-the-Wold. But what is extraordinary is that somewhere along the way, they must have divorced, because she married again, and she married Ellis Raymond Cochrane. And he was an interesting character. He was from a well-to-do family, and he had bought the village of Guiting Power. and had sort of put all the buildings back to what they were and formed a trust. And when you go to Guiding Power now, it's like stepping back about 70 years. It really is quite extraordinary. But she sort of then she married this chap. But what is extraordinary about him is that he was born a she. He was born Effie Rosemary Cochrane, but in 1940 became a man, and I've actually seen him on YouTube. You can actually see him, and he looks like an old country gentleman. But poor old Sally, she died in 1977. Again, a heavy smoker, and I think a drinker as well, from all I hear. And poor old Carol Jenner died very young at the age of 55 because of lung cancer, because of all her smoking. Now, I've gone on way over time here, folks. So if we can go back to me again for a moment, please, Emily. Sorry, I've prattled on, but there's so much to tell you, folks. I've got some wonderful extracts of My Dear Public. And if there's time at the end and you'd like to hear some, I'll read them. But I think I'd better shut up now and let's give it to questions.
Thank you, Stan. That was great. There was a lot to cover, but it was really wonderful to hear you talking about the theatre, but about Sally and Carol with such passion. I'm going to hand over now to Alison, who's going to talk to us for 10 minutes about the cinema, and then we'll have some time at the end for some final questions in our quiz.
Okay, I'm starting at the end, if you like, because 59 years ago, hundreds of people could be seen queuing down Sycamore Road in Amersham on the Hill, all waiting in line for the box office at the Regent Cinema to buy tickets for this film, Audrey Hepburn, of course, in Breakfast at Tiffany's. And although, of course, it was a very popular film, the high demand for tickets was because this show was going to be the very last ever screening at the cinema, and everyone in town wanted to be there. Audiences had been dwindling at the cinema, mainly because of the competition from television and the embassy in Chesham, which, although also part of the same Shipman and King circuit, usually had the very latest films at least 1 week before the Regent. However, there was still a lot of affection for the cinema in the town. A petition to save it was presented to the council soon after the closure was announced. There was hope for a last-minute reprieve when the International Theatre director and writer Basil Ashmore, who lived locally, lived in Chesham Boys, he campaigned to acquire the Regent for live professional theatre. And in order to replace the cinema with a supermarket, approval had to be sought from the Minister for Housing and Local Government, as the town map showed the site as a place of entertainment. Sadly, the change of use was granted by the Minister, Charles Hill, who did not even have the courtesy to reply to Basil Ashmore's letters. So the fate of the cinema had been sealed, if you like, the previous year when Amersham Council sanctioned the application by British Land for its change of use, because the owners of the Regent, Shipman and King, only had a lease, and this had now expired. So this handsome building was demolished, sadly. That awful photo we have in our collection, and then replaced by this very uninspiring building of the Maypole supermarket, a very sort of 50s development there, as you can see. Also, I hadn't spotted this before, but you've still got a little bit of the Art Deco building that, you know, was part of the whole cinema complex there, still survived till way after the cinema had gone. Okay, let's go back to the beginning though. 1921. Apologies for the state of these photos, but they're the first photos we've been able to find of this gentleman, Walter Collins. And I only received those yesterday in a bundle of newspaper cuttings that were sent to me all about his career. Fantastic collection sent to me by his granddaughter. And you can see even from these grainy photos what a handsome man he was. So he moved here in the early 1920s. His real name was Walter Rowland Croft, but he was known professionally as Walter Collins. And he moved to Chesham Boys. He was born in Liverpool, probably when his musician father was on tour. And he graduated with honours from the Manchester Royal College of Music for pianoforte playing, composition and conducting. And for some time was associated with the Halley Orchestra in Manchester. In London, he met and married his wife, Florence May Oliver, also an accomplished musician, and they moved out to Cheshire Boys. At the time, he was on the editorial staff of the music publisher Ashburg, Hopwood and Crew, and he'd already composed some really successful waltzes. Oriental Memories was one, Cameo, and something called the Serenade Humoresque. And these were like the dance numbers of the day. They were incredibly popular, so he would have been like the Beatles of his era, I guess you'd say. So an article in Encore, one of the music magazines, described him as a well-known music director with many reviews, pantomime and musical comedies to his credit. He has toured with every kind of musical combination in every corner of the British Isles and conducted everything from grand opera downwards. So they move out here, presumably like most of us, to bring up their family and have you know, a semi-rural lifestyle. This lovely house in Cheshire Boys is still owned by the family. When they had it, it was smaller. Florence extended it in the 1950s. So when they first moved here, it was just sort of that one gable going down. It's a Boise design house, or a special house. And initially, Collins gave piano lessons locally and organised concerts and dances before taking over the Bijou Hall. So the Bijou Hall is where what became the Playhouse. So it was built as a hall for for putting on entertainments for Amersham on the Hill, when Amersham on the Hill was first developed. And this grainy photo is what it actually looked like when Collins took it over. So he renamed it the Pavilion, and he opened it as a silent cinema. So it was actually a cinema before it was the Playhouse. And eventually it had 150 seats, and it showed silent movies with a piano and percussion accompaniment. And it opened in November 1922 with a concert party and a play. And then it was followed by the very first silent film in Amersham, which had the glorious title of Forbidden Fruit. And Walter himself was on the piano. And children's performances were introduced in January 1923 with Rin Tin Tin, a free penny a seat and a free bag of sweets. Florence, his wife, ran a busy cafe in the basement, and it was a success. Towards the end of 1927, Collins felt that a much larger cinema would be profitably run in Amersham, and he bought a piece of land on Sycamore Road with the idea of building there, which was a real, you know, visionary investment with no guarantee of success at the time. So he obviously needed help to build his cinema, and he met up with local builder Alfred Woodley, who lived at Longwood on South Road, and together they established Colwood, an amalgamation of both their names, Colwood Pictures and Theatres Limited, with capital of £5,000. They took on quite an important architect, F.C. Mitchell, who the following year completed the Savoy Theatre in Dublin, and he was commissioned to design the new building, very much in an Art Deco style, as you can see. And it was completed just 8 months later. It had a steelwork frame and reinforced concrete construction, and this great photo is all the workers involved with that construction. And presumably on the front row there, you've got Collins, Woodley, the foreman, and possibly the architect all seated in the front on those chairs. It'd be nice to identify them more definitively. So it was a quite majestic cinema. It had everything the modern audience could want, lots of glamour and spectacle, and it could seat 700 people, which seems quite extraordinary, doesn't it? Had an orchestra pit and a 30-foot deep stage. There's the stage for theatrical productions. So it was considered a real asset to the locality, according to the local press. Described as a first-class house of entertainment and comfort, far in advance of houses in many towns of larger populations, one of the best equipped theatres in Bucks. So next to the cinema, I've already said that Woodley built those rather lovely Art Deco shops as well. And this is where the Regent Cafe was. It also had accommodation above it, and the Croft Collins family moved there with their 2 daughters, Pam and Myra, and a baby boy, Barry. And Florence opened her cafe again, the Regent Cafe, offering coffee, luncheons, suppers and tea dances. The opening film in December 1928 was the British silent movie The Hunting Tower, which had been filmed at Cricklewood Studios and starred Sir Harry Lauder, or Lauder, I'm not quite sure how you say that. The stage was also used for theatrical productions and concerts. Jack Warner actually starred here, Dixon of Dock Green that is, in a Gilbert and Sullivan production of Euryanthe. And Colwood Pictures invested in sound quite quickly. When they built the cinema, it was just on the cusp of talkies coming in. And so the very first talkie, 100% talkie production was this one, High Treason, which looks amazing. It was a British science fiction drama set in a futuristic America. And perhaps the reason why they chose this film was that Walter Collins was one of 4 composers who worked on the movie, and he actually had quite a successful film career. So in the first year of operating, the Regent had a profit of £1,473. I looked that up, it's about nearly 96,000 today. But already the relationship between the 2 directors was in serious difficulties. In 1929, so the following year, Alfred Woodley had built this cinema, a second cinema, exact same design as our one. This was the Rivoli at Ruislip. But he hadn't really consulted Collins in this process. And Collins believed that the invoices presented to the company were excessive, and he accused him of taking advantage of Collins's lack of business experience. In turn, Woodley felt Collins was distracted by his other musical commitments and was not devoting enough time to the business. So at the end of the 1930s, the relationship ended with an acrimonious court case. Collins went on to have a successful career composing light entertainment dance music. He also conducted and composed for the film industry, apparently turning down an offer to go and live in Hollywood. And for the last 20 years of his life, he was the musical director of the Deloire Pavilion in Bexhill-on-Sea. After he died, Florence returned to live at White Cottage in Cheshire Boys, where her parents had been living, and some of the families still live there today. Alfred Woodley continued to expand his business interests. He later became chairman of Amersham Council. However, I found this extraordinary cutting. I don't think you can make it out there very clearly. But in 1931, he formed a company, General Exhibits Limited, to carry on business as proprietors and producers of exhibitions of waxworks. And his fellow directors were Hugh Conrad Tussaud, the great-great-grandson, of course, of Mary Tussaud, and Vega, a dental surgeon. I mean, we'd love to know what actually happened to that business idea, because obviously we never ended up with waxworks in Amersham. It'd be a great story to find out more about that one. So in 1931, Shipman and King bought Sycamore Road lease and added the Regency to their growing circuit of cinemas. In 1937, they built the Embassy in Chesham, and 1938, the Rex in Berkhamsted. And Rex is one of only 4 surviving Shipman and King cinemas. Now, almost every family in Amersham knew someone who worked at the Regent. In the box office, chocolate kiosk, usherettes, projectionists, etc. And these are 3 members of the same family who all worked at the Regent at the end of World War II. On the left is Jim Challis, who was a projectionist. His mom, Annie, in the middle was a cleaner. And his sister, Elizabeth Barry, on the right was an usherette. So until its closure in 1962, the Regent really was central to life in Amersham, with remembrance services, royal wedding screenings, and gala fundraising concerts held here. In 1955, visitors were treated to an exhibition of Dirk Bogart's suits in the foyer. Local tailors, Nankoro and Temple, had made his suits and uniforms for the film Doctor and C, which of course was showing at that time at the Regent. And as we've already mentioned, as Stan mentioned Dirk Bogart earlier, it was great excitement in 1955. Not only had he been elected Star of the Year and was one of the most famous British actors, but he was actually living locally in Amersham, and he had just bought Beale House in Little Chalfont, so he was very much the local celebrity of his time. I wrote recently about the cinema, and one of the things I asked was, I've been asking people if they can remember what colour the interior was. And it must be, so many people locally still have these great memories of the cinema, but no one has come up with a description of the interior for me. We think the seats were red and the usherettes' uniforms were red, but whether they were all too diverted on the back row or it was too dark in there, but no one can tell me what colour the walls and ceiling and everything was. So if any of you know, please let me know, because we would love to know.
Thank you, Alison. That was brilliant. Yeah, I just want to, well, I've got time for a couple of questions, but where Stan talked about the amazing collection that we have about the Playhouse, which we do, lots of programmes, we do have some real gems about the cinema, but not too much. So I just wanted to show you a couple of the things that we do have so you can see them. We've got this programme from the Pavilion, which was that very early cinema that Alison mentioned on the top of Station Road. And this is actually for a concert, a musical concert in 1922. And Walter Collins is on the piano. So that's a really lovely thing to have. But we really only got 1 or 2 actual programmes from the cinema. So if any of you have anything tucked away, we'd love to hear them. We've only got a few. This one is September 1931, Pictureland, issued by the Regent Amersham. It's quite a long programme. There's things about stars that were there, and then a bit like the theatre programmes, it has a double spread in the middle that shows the performances that were on. But we'd love to have a bit more, and like Alison said, we'd love to know a little bit more about the insides of the cinema. We've got time for some questions. If anybody would like to ask 1 or 2, just unmute yourself and ask, and then we'll finish with our quiz.
I spotted Ralph asked one about whether there was an organ. I don't think there was, but please correct me, and if you, Peter, or anyone that remembers the cinema, but I think it was very much, because he was this musician, pianist and conductor. I think he designed it to have a full orchestra for most events, so I think it was much more of a musician's theatre initially. So I'm not aware of an organ.
It was just in the picture where you looked at the stage, above, I think, the exits either side, there is like what looks like it could be where the organ pipes were. I just think that's the cinema where I was brought up. That's where the organ pipes used to be.
It could well be, Ralph. I'd be very happy for someone to correct me or more information.
Anyone else like to ask a question? No? Okay, well, thank you, Alison. Thank you, Stan. Hopefully everyone's enjoyed that.
I think I ought to put in a plea as well for the Algiva when everything reopens. I think we really need to support our local theatre and cinema. It's, I think we've all really missed that, and we need to make sure we get back there as soon as we can, support it.
Yeah, I agree.
Sorry about this, folks. A little personal commercial, really. During lockdown, I have spent the time putting together 5 15-minute radio programs about the Playhouse, really using the voices, which I haven't used today, from our collection at the museum, of Sally, of Carol, of other people who've written about them, what have you. And now all I need to do is to tell the BBC that they really have to broadcast these. And so the way they do it these days is you can either do it in-house through a producer there, or through a recognized radio production company. So I need the contacts. If anybody's got a contact that we can get the news of the Amersham Playhouse and the Sally Latimer and Carol Jenner on the radio, please let me know. stanpretty@ymail.com or care of Emily.
Right, we're going to wrap up now. Just to tell you a few resources you might like to, if you want to find out a little bit more, or you're interested in finding out more. Hopefully you should be able to see this. This is our YouTube page. If you put into Google Amersham Museum YouTube, you'll find our page, and you can see there under videos, if you click under videos, some of the previous local stories that we've done. So there's the one about emigre artists, 20th century architects, the census one, which was the last one we did. And we've now got the Weller one up, the first one that we did, because there was something we had to sort out on that one. So they're all there, and this one will be shortly. Within our website, there are 2 articles about the Playhouse. So there's the one that covers the period that Stan did today, which is 36 to 49. And then there's Phil's article, which is 49 to 56. And you can find those by going under the history section on the top of the toolbar here. And then you can just, in the search function here, if you just type in Playhouse, you'll find both of those articles fairly easily. So they're both resources there. And Alison has recently written an article about the cinema, which is also up on the website. So if you type that in, I think you'll find that one too. Our next session is, we're lengthening the gap between the sessions now as things begin to ease up, and you might want to be spending a bit of time outdoors and not always on Zoom. So we're going to move to monthly sessions, and the next one is on Wednesday the 21st of April, when Alison and I are going to be talking about social housing. in the local area. We are planning some topics and themes for future talks, but if there's something that you'd like us to talk about, something that you're interested in, it might be about a person or a place, then do let us know, and we'll try and construct a session around it. So thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to see you soon.